In the annals of biblical history, few figures embody the volatile intersection of political loyalty, deep-seated bitterness, and the slow grind of divine justice quite like Shimei, the son of Gera, whose life story serves as a chilling psychological thriller set against the backdrop of Israel's most turbulent civil war. The narrative begins not with a whisper, but with a roar of hatred in the year 976 BC, as King David, broken, barefoot, and weeping, leads a ragtag group of loyalists out of Jerusalem to escape the murderous coup staged by his own son, Absalom. As the royal party descends into the rugged ravines of Bahurim, a man appears on the ridge above them like a phantom of the past, screaming insults and hurling jagged stones at the king who was once the nation's greatest hero. This man is Shimei, a member of the House of Saul, and in his eyes, David is not a legitimate ruler, but a man of blood and a worthless scoundrel who finally deserves the agonizing betrayal he is currently suffering. With every rock he throws and every handful of dust he kicks into the air, Shimei is attempting to rewrite history, blaming David for the downfall of Saul's dynasty and interpreting this family rebellion as God's long-awaited vengeance for the blood of the former king. The scene is thick with tension as David's elite bodyguards, the mighty men of Israel, stand paralyzed by the sheer audacity of this lone civilian's assault on the Lord's anointed. Abishai, a general known for his ferocity and hair-trigger temper, reaches for his hilt and growls a request that echoes the primal instincts of the time. "Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over now and take off his head." In one of the most profound displays of spiritual humility ever recorded, David restrains his general, suggesting that perhaps God himself has commanded Shimei to curse him as a form of divine discipline for his own secret sins, such as the affair with Bathsheba and the murder of Uriah. David's refusal to retaliate is a masterclass in faith, as he reasons that if he endures this public shaming with patience, the Lord might eventually look upon his misery and repay him with good for the cursing he receives that day. Shimei, emboldened by the king's apparent weakness, continues to stalk the ridge for miles, raining down a relentless storm of stones and insults until the royal party disappears into the safety of the Jordan Valley. However, the wheel of fortune turns with brutal efficiency, and the rebellion of Absalom collapses in a forest of tangles and spears, leaving David to return to Jerusalem not as a fugitive, but as a victorious sovereign. News of David's restoration travels faster than a desert wind, and Shimei, realizing that his head is now on the literal chopping block, rushes to the Jordan River with a massive entourage of 1,000 Benjamites to perform a desperate act of political theater. He falls prostrate in the mud before the king's ferryboat, trading his rocks for groveling pleas and begging David not to remember the perverse thing your servant did on the day the king left Jerusalem. Abishai is there once again, his sword half drawn and his mind unchanged, arguing that no amount of public apology can wash away the treasonous act of cursing the man God put on the throne. David, wanting to mark his return with a spirit of national reconciliation rather than a purge of his enemies, rebukes his generals and swears a royal oath to Shimei. "You shall not die." While this oath saved Shimei's life in the moment, it created a complex legal and moral dilemma that would simmer beneath the surface of the palace for the remainder of David's long reign. Shimei returned to his estates, likely believing he had outsmarted death and manipulated the king's mercy. Yet he remained a marked man, a walking symbol of the deep tribal divisions that still threatened to tear the kingdom of Israel apart. As the years passed and David grew old, the memory of that day in the ravine never truly faded. Rather, it became a part of the king's final to-do list as he prepared to hand over the scepter to his son Solomon. On his deathbed, in a scene filled with shadows and gravity, David gives Solomon a series of private instructions that reveal the cold reality of ancient Near Eastern statecraft and the lingering weight of Shimei's sin. David tells the young Solomon that while he personally kept his oath not to kill Shimei, the man is still a danger to the crown, and Solomon, in his legendary wisdom, must find a way to bring his gray head down to the grave in blood. This request isn't merely about personal revenge. It is about the cleansing of the house, ensuring that the new king starts his reign without a powerful and bitter traitor living freely in the heart of the tribe of Benjamin. When David finally breathes his last and Solomon ascends the throne, one of the first high-stakes meetings the new king calls is with the aging Shimei. Solomon does not immediately execute the man, which would have violated his father's oath and potentially sparked a Benjamite revolt. Instead, he constructs a brilliant legal trap that puts the power of life and death entirely back into Shimei's own hands. Solomon commands Shimei to move into Jerusalem, build a house there, and live under permanent house arrest, with the explicit warning that the moment he crosses the Brook Kidron, his life is forfeit. The Brook Kidron was a symbolic and geographic boundary. To cross it meant leaving the city toward his ancestral lands, an act that would signal a return to his old tribal loyalties and a rejection of the king's authority. Shimei, likely relieved that he wasn't being led straight to the gallows, enthusiastically agrees to the terms, stating, "The saying is good, as my lord the king has said, so your servant will do." For 3 years, the arrangement works perfectly, and Shimei lives as a wealthy resident of the capital, watched by spies but otherwise free, while the memory of his rocks and curses begins to feel like a distant dream. However, Shimei's character, marked by the same impulsiveness and greed that fueled his original outburst, eventually leads him into a fatal miscalculation involving 2 runaway slaves. When he hears that his property has fled to the Philistine city of Gath, Shimei faces a choice between his wealth and his oath. And in a moment of staggering spiritual blindness, he saddles his donkey and rides out of Jerusalem. By crossing the boundary to retrieve his slaves, Shimei effectively tells the king that his personal financial interests are more important than the royal decree and the oath he swore before God. He manages to find his slaves and bring them back to the city, perhaps even congratulating himself on a successful journey and assuming that Solomon's focus was elsewhere during his brief absence. He was wrong. The king's intelligence network had tracked his every move, and as soon as Shimei passed back through the city gates, the trap David had envisioned years earlier finally snapped shut. Solomon summons Shimei for a final audience, not as a neighbor or a subject, but as a man who has judged himself by his own actions and proven that his heart was never truly repentant. The king's words in 1 Kings 2:42-44 are a devastating indictment. "Did I not make you swear by the Lord and warn you, and you said, 'The word I have heard is good'?" Solomon then pivots from the broken oath to the original sin, reminding Shimei of all the evil that his heart was privy to when he cursed David, implying that the old curse was still a poison in Shimei's soul. The king explains that while Shimei's curse was an attempt to bring blood upon David's head, it is actually Shimei's own blood that will now return upon his own head as a matter of cosmic and judicial balance. In this moment, Shimei realized that the mercy he had enjoyed for 2 decades was not a license to be reckless, but a period of probation that he had ultimately failed. Solomon signals Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, the kingdom's chief executioner, and a man who specialized in the hard tasks of the transition of power. With a single stroke of the sword, the long, dramatic saga of Shimei, the son of Gera, came to an abrupt and violent end, finally fulfilling the dying wish of the man he had mocked in the desert. Scripture records that after this execution, the kingdom was established in the hand of Solomon, suggesting that the removal of Shimei was the final piece of the puzzle in securing a peaceful and united Israel. The story of Shimei serves as a powerful archetype in biblical literature, illustrating the concept of sowing and reaping, where the seeds of bitterness planted in a moment of crisis eventually grow into a harvest of destruction. It also highlights the different styles of leadership between David and Solomon. David, the man of heart and emotion who leaned toward mercy, and Solomon, the man of law and wisdom who leaned toward absolute justice. For modern viewers, Shimei is a cautionary tale about the danger of living in the past and the fatal mistake of letting a grudge define one's entire identity. Shimei could have been a redeemed man, a witness to David's grace, but he chose to remain a prisoner of his own resentment toward the house of David. His decision to leave Jerusalem for the sake of 2 slaves is a metaphor for how humans often trade eternal security for temporary material gains, failing to see the Kidron brooks in our own lives until it is too late. Even David's role in the story is complex, showing that while he could forgive a personal affront, he also recognized the necessity of justice for the sake of the nation's future. The silence of Shimei during his final sentencing is deafening, as he has no defense to offer against a king who had given him every opportunity to live in peace. As we reflect on these 50 scenes of triumph and tragedy, we see that Shimei's stones eventually turned into the very walls of the house arrest that led to his demise. The narrative concludes with a somber reminder that while the wheels of justice may turn slowly, they turn with an inevitability that no amount of political maneuvering can escape. This is the story of Shimei, a man who had the ear of kings and the mercy of God, yet lost everything because he could not conquer the small, bitter world inside his own heart.